You might think medieval London was all foggy fields and noble knights. By the 1300s, it was crowded and full of rules. Houses and workshops pressed together in a tight tangle. The city ran on small habits that people barely noticed. From the street, you saw leaning timber and narrow lanes. But there was more happening inside than you would guess. That small mismatch between appearance and practice is where the story begins. Step into a street and you get two quick impressions. A sharp smell of smoke and of the river nearby meets you. A constant rattle of carts and many voices fills the air. You can almost hear someone muttering that they are late. The timber houses lean toward each other over the street. A faint bell rings now and then above the noise. The city worked because everyone knew their corner. Cheapside was the market where food and news changed hands, and where prices mattered. Guilds were bands of craftsmen who set the rules, taught apprentices, and kept trades steady. Parishes were small neighbourhoods that handled the poor, the sick, and local rules. The Thames was the highway that carried cloth, coal, and people. Bells set the day. 3 rings marked the start of work, and another marked prayer. Merchants timed their deals to that rhythm. A baker might drop a tray and still beat the bell because time mattered more than spilled flour. The city could fall apart quickly. Wooden streets meant a single spark could set a lane on fire. The same walls that kept attackers out also trapped people inside when food ran short. Sewers were basic, so bad smells and sickness were common. A dispute between guilds could stop trade for weeks. One wrong decision or one unlucky night could affect the whole market. What is easy to miss is the quiet work that held it together. The wardens, clerks, watermen and apprentices, whose names you would not find on any grand list, but whose choices mattered. A note from a warden could close a stall. Timing by a waterman could decide if a shipment arrived before the tide turned. These small, often unseen actions moved the city more than public speeches did, and they usually stayed out of sight. When you picture London as a set of small decisions, a bell you hear, a clerk's scribble you read, a bargeman's choice you notice, the city looks different. It is not just stone and timber. You see a series of small habits that steer everyday life. Those small, nearly accidental actions make you wonder how the city later changed. Think of the Tower and you think of kings and fear. You realise it was built to do both. The Tower of London was a royal fortress and a prison. It mattered because it kept power visible and punishment even more visible. It was a simple, public way to remind people who ran the place. By the 12th century, that lesson was already on full display. You wonder what private conversations happened behind those iron gates. Old London Bridge was a bridge with houses and shops. It mattered because it turned every crossing into a busy street and a toll booth. Walking over it, you smelled river mud and smoke. You heard timber creak underfoot, and you could almost hear a baker grumble when the whole bridge swayed, and he thought his morning was gone. The city walls and gates formed a ring of stone and checkpoints. They mattered because they controlled who came in and who was left out. This was how the city ran day to day. Gates opened at dawn. Guards checked names and goods. Tolls were collected. Market carts lined up. Warders at the tower logged prisoners and treasures. Merchants grumbled at the delays and accepted them as part of the routine. But those systems were fragile. A single stray spark from a chimney on the bridge could set a row of shops on fire. Gates closed for safety could trap supplies inside the walls. A packed crowd at an execution or a procession could turn a public event into a dangerous crush with smoke and shouting. One sudden order could change a routine morning into a real crisis. The quiet power lived in small things you would miss at first. You could see the tide and the river pilots who timed deliveries, the toll clerks whose ledgers could delay a merchant shipment, and the gatekeeper who could hold a cart for an hour with a wink. Those small actions shaped the rhythm of the city more than any herald or town crier. You could watch how that small control grew into larger outcomes. You notice the tower, the bridge houses, and the walls are not just scenery. They shape movement, create danger, and mark authority with small adjustments and sudden changes. When you see how a toll, a tide, or a locked gate can reroute a day, you begin to suspect many other small choices steer the city. That raises a bigger question. Who decided when to pull a lever or ring a bell, and why? You think markets are just loud places to buy bread? Think again. Markets shaped how the city worked. Cheapside was the main merchant street. People bought cloth and spices there. They also bought items to show off. Cheapside mattered because merchants set prices and fashions there. Smithfield Market held livestock and large crowds. You could hear animals and people there. Gossip and public business met in the open space. Guilds were groups that decided who could trade, who could train, and what counted as acceptable work. By the 1500s, the street, the field, and the guild together kept London moving in ways that looked ordinary, but were not. That leaves you with a question. Walk into Cheapside, and you would notice a handful of small things. You would smell the sour tang of fish stalls. You would hear the soft scrape of the board of a cloth merchant and the occasional shout cutting through quieter talk between a seller and a stubborn customer. The air smelled of smoke, grease, and wood dust mixed together. It sounded like people practicing their day, bargaining one deal at a time. On feast days, the smells became richer and the voices grew louder. People complained about the noise, and then shrugged and moved on. Here is how it actually worked. Stallholders set up early. They paid rent or owed a guild favour. Sellers weighed goods on standard scales. Apprentices fetched items. Journeymen handled trouble. Guilds checked quality and trained new hands. They sometimes fixed prices to stop traders from undercutting each other, which sounds sensible until you want a real bargain. A butcher cut meat to a guild rule. A clothier tested thread. Buyers smelled, poked, and haggled. You can almost see someone sigh when a shipment arrives late, because one delay could throw the whole morning off. It could go wrong in a heartbeat. If a wagon arrived at Smithfield with sick animals, disease could spread and prices could spike. If a scale was tampered with, a baker might lose a week of profit and mutter curses you could hear across the street. Guild rules could protect quality, but they could also block new ideas and let a few powerful men keep everyone else in check. During fairs, the rhythm of the crowd changed. There was more coin, more temptation, and a higher chance of a purse going missing in the press. The subtle power lived in small hands and quiet notes. Clerks kept the rolls, guildmasters wrote the fines, and market women who actually checked the eggs and called out bad bread shaped what people trusted. The scribe with an ink-stained finger, a clerk making a tiny correction, and an apprentice deciding which stall to save first were the moves that nudged the market more than any public proclamation. You would not notice at first, but those small choices accumulated. You are there on a Thursday when the bells ring as normal. You watch a clerk tuck a new rule into a ledger, and you see a dozen traders rearrange their stalls. You hear people mention a feast day planned for later. The city's routine shifts a little, and people adjust. Some show relief, others roll their eyes. The market sets the city's pace. And these small, quiet changes shape more than people notice until later. You might think a cathedral has one job, to be quiet and holy. St. Paul did not get the memo. It acted like the loudspeaker for the city, the courtroom, and the living room all at once. Those roles overlapped, and that created strange moments. It also left you with one clear question: who was actually in charge? Walk by on a market morning, and you hear bells over the sound of cartwheels and shouting. You smell tallow and roast meat in the air. You hear a tradesman mutter the words, "Blessings first bills," later as he ducks into the churchyard. People move in small, careful rhythms. You see them take small, careful steps, the way people move when they do not want to spill their porridge or harm their reputation. St. Paul's Cathedral was the city's biggest church and served as a public notice board. Parish churches acted as local hubs, where officials recorded births, marriages, and debts. Processions were public rituals that brought religion into the streets and drew people out of their homes. At Paul's Cross, preachers read news and sermons to crowds. Guilds marched in ordered lines on feast days. Parish clerks kept lists and records so the city could function. Even a fisherman or a blacksmith paused work for a coronation or a holy day. No one could ignore the calendar when church festivals and holy days set the day's schedule. Public life could flip quickly. A sermon meant to calm people sometimes stirred up gossip. A misplaced banner or a muddy street could turn a cheerful procession into a shoving match. Crowds brought money and meaning, but also pickpockets, rumours, and sudden tempers. One wrong shout or one rainy Sunday could push the whole scene from orderly to chaotic. The real steering often came from small roles that no one wrote poems about. Vergers, bell ringers, parish clerks, and guild marshals kept timing, space, and protocol in order, sometimes with a wink. The neat list a parish clerk kept could decide who stood where. A pause by a bell ringer could change when a procession stepped off. Those small, almost invisible choices nudged the rituals of the city in ways that mattered more than people noticed. You stand in a crowd pressed into the square. Banners are bright and bells hum. You see a clerk tuck a paper into his sleeve, and you hear the bell ringer count the beats. Everyone waits for the moment the city would turn together. For a moment, things feel whole, shared and sensible. That small, almost accidental order makes you wonder what else is being shaped out of sight.